Welcome to CISO ASEAN Executive Session. I'm Estelle Quek, Editorial Director at CISO ASEAN, and it is a pleasure to be joined today by Michael Montaya, Chief Operating Officer at BlueVoyant. Southeast Asia's cybersecurity landscape is evolving rapidly, marked by rising threat sophistication, uneven regulatory maturity, and persistent talent shortages. Against this backdrop, organizations are under pressure to not only defend their digital assets, but to also build resilience in a region defined by diversity and growth. Michael brings over 25 years of leadership experience in cybersecurity. Today, we explore how Southeast Asian enterprises can better navigate this complex terrain, from managing third-party risks to leveraging AI for threat detection and aligning with emerging regulatory frameworks. Michael, thank you for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Stella. It's absolutely an absolute honor. You have always incredible guests on, so I feel probably underqualified as well as deeply honored to talk about two of my favorite topics. One is Southeast Asia region and the Asia region overall, as I lived there for many years and operated out of the region, and security, which is something I'm very passionate about. So thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Most welcome, Michael. Let's begin by hearing a bit about your background and your career path in IT and what led you to this leadership position at BlueVoyant.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And, I started down this career path in the mid 90s. My first, what I would call my first real job out of the university, even though I did a bunch of internships, I was actually working at Microsoft running some of their network, part of their network division. And in that time, I got the opportunity to deal with some of the largest network build outs in the world. Actually, at some points, some could argue 80% of the internet traffic traversed Microsoft's platform. Some would argue it's probably even more than that today. And as a result, you can imagine we're also one of the most attacked infrastructures on the planet as well, and certainly attempted attacked environments on the planet as well. So I learned a lot about security just through that function as well, and recognized there was a lot of things that we need to do differently in security, not only in terms of a product perspective, in terms of a operations perspective, but just even in terms of public and private partnerships perspective around policy and regulation and things that need to evolve to help us address what I think this continues to be one of the biggest global challenges on the planet, and that's cybersecurity. So I started in that space working with Microsoft. Moved into a career with FireEye and Mandiant, which were in early startup days, and helped them mature their organizations. Have been a global operator as a CISO for both Equinix and Digital Realty, two very large data center as well as interconnection companies across the globe. And now Chief Operating Officer and Executive Advisor for BlueVoyant. Also sit on the board of directors for F5, where I continue to extend my my passion for this topic, as well as my impact to help boards of directors drive more management accountability, governance accountability across cybersecurity as boards continue to evaluate their roles in cybersecurity.
That's a very impressive career, Mike. Now, if you reminisce on your whole career journey, what has been your greatest achievement in driving cybersecurity awareness and resiliency?
Oh, well, I wish there were one. I would just argue that this is in general, this cybersecurity is one of those industries where one group or one person will not do the job here. This is truly a team sport, and you hear that all the time. So awareness activities for any CISO is typically at the top of the agenda for security executive. Because they recognize they can't do this alone, right? It truly takes a village, as they say, or it's a team sport, as they say. And even at Equinix, we ran, and it was actually led by one of the most senior awareness folks I've ever been able to work around. She actually helped us build an industry-leading awareness program to help ensure that the entire company was thinking about cybersecurity in a different way. So those are definitely activities around that are absolutely brilliant. But I would say that the thing that strikes me the most is when I was at FireEye, and keep in mind, like around 2014, the cybersecurity space across the globe, but I happened to be in Asia at the time, living out of Singapore, was a very different topic around cybersecurity at boards, within the governments. It was typically a function of IT, sort of buried in a topic of either network support or desktop support. And it was a growing issue that wasn't getting enough attention. And one of the things with FireEye and Mandiant, which I'm quite proud of, is the awareness that we brought to boards, is awareness that we brought to public forums, and helping drive a lot of disclosure rules and cybersecurity laws across Asia, which I was very involved in. And that's something that I think was very important to turn the corner in our industry, to take really what I would consider a very buried topic in most organizations and in most governments to something that is now almost top of mind to every single one of them. And I think the work we did at FireEye and Mandiant helped really drive a lot of that awareness across the industry.
Now, Mike, can you share with our CISO audience what are the most critical cybersecurity challenges Southeast Asian organizations are facing today, considering the surge in sophisticated ransomware, malware attacks, advanced persistent threats, and also state-sponsored espionage?
Yeah, I mean, Asia's a fascinating space. I mean, Asia is no different than any other part of the world in terms of we're all facing the same challenges, right? We have this the threat landscape shifting at an accelerated path. So we'll go back to 2014 again. At that point, to execute an attack in a company would take a threat actor, even a relatively sophisticated threat actor, would take them, days, if not weeks, to get into an environment. And once they got in, it would take them weeks to days to get to the next movement in that environment. So what we call lateral movement. And so typically as a responder, you had 3 to 5 days once somebody actually got into your environment to think about, how can I actually respond to that? And today those days have turned into seconds, and we're seeing attacks happen in, less than 18 seconds, where threat actors, once they get in, they're able to actually move across an environment and create some pretty big destruction. And we've seen this across, large attacks across the globe that are taking advantage of some vulnerability, or very targeted attacks by a nation state, maybe trying to do espionage or something that is a little bit more cryptic in terms of detecting these capabilities. So Asia, just like the rest of the globe, deals with the same challenge. We have the problem of math that sometimes is hard for us to address, and that is we are dealing with threat actors who continue to get more sophisticated, continue to use more AI, continue to use more automation in their ability to attack us, and they continue to live off the land, which is they take advantage of the most basic things that we're having to address, like not patching our devices, or people having poor passwords, or not using multi-factor authentication. As simple as those topics seem, they're really hard to execute at a global scale. So Asia's facing the same challenges. Asia also has some challenges because you have a lot of sophistication in terms of threat actors in your backyard as well, or in the backyard of Asia. So that's and with that, a lot of geopolitical conflict that typically is a little higher than some other parts of the world. So Asia tends to deal with those issues that impact things like critical infrastructure, impacts government situations a bit more, and I think that continues to be a challenge for the region. Talent gaps consistent across the globe, but definitely Asia continues to deal with some of those gaps as well. But I would say the area that, and I think Singapore is one of the top, if I understand some of the research studies, where we see third-party or supply chain attacks continue to be on the rise in that area. And some studies that we see, at least even internally to the company I'm at now, BlueVoyant, we see almost 81% of increase in attacks coming from third parties. You see it from other data points where you're seeing ransomware attacks are typically starting from a third party. And we're not just talking third party as it relates to a critical vulnerability that comes from maybe a supply chain, but literally one of our suppliers that we use to help us do heating and cooling inside our critical infrastructure, or help us with logistics that we use, or doing technology services for us as companies. These are the suppliers that tend to be on the rise as it comes to bring us attacks. And we're seeing some of the biggest rises coming out of Asia, specifically Singapore.
Thanks, Mike. Nowadays, I see news about ransomware tactics, including double and triple extortion, targeting critical infrastructure and vital services like fuel distribution in Indonesia, public transport in Malaysia, and health services in Philippines. From your experience, could you elaborate for us how Southeast Asia organizations adapt their cybersecurity strategies to address these increasingly sophisticated and ever-evolving cyber threats, especially in this diverse and high-growth region?
Yeah, no, so great question. We are seeing a rise in this sort of coming back to the same trough a few times, right? Which I think is an indication of, one, how quickly people are resolving and remediating the true cause of challenges, which isn't always a simple thing, especially if it includes a third-party supplier that's part of your attack chain. But what we're seeing, and still, this is a bit sad because what I'm about to say here, but there used to be almost a code of ethics among thieves, right? That if they broke in once, they would give you what they had, and then they would never come back. And we're actually seeing that reversal of policy by threat actors, where they are coming back, and a lot of times it's not the same threat actor. Typically, a lot of times what the threat actors do is they will go sell credentials, they'll go sell access through this different infrastructure, what we call the whole broker infrastructure. And in reselling of that, someone else will come back and take over where they left off. And what you're seeing, I think, in general, is just a maturity of the entire ecosystem of threat actors, where not only are they sharing intel better, they're sharing tactics better, they're sharing automation better, they're building franchise models where you can do ransomware as a service, all this stuff that we know about that they can do as a service. So they're actually maturing on those sides. And as a result of that, you actually have third and secondary markets, or secondary and third markets, that you can pick up credentials and other elements of access and buy these through different access brokers. So it is unfortunately on the rise when you see this type of activity. And this is very unfortunate, but it's just the reality, because a lot of our defenses are becoming more secure, especially with the larger organizations. So those organizations that aren't as fortunate, when they tend to get impacted once, the belief is maybe they haven't corrected it quick enough and they're going to come back in pretty quickly. But I think it comes down to the same things. I mean, you have to have a zero trust policy, which I think most organizations are. And zero trust doesn't mean that we don't trust people. It just means that you have defense in depth. You build segmentation, you do the basics around sounds like the basics, but it's not as easy as I say, even though I say basics, so please bear with me. But you're doing things like network segmentation, multi-factor authentication, addressing some of the elements where anytime someone comes into your environment, you challenge the authenticity of who that person is or who that identity is. And then you provide the right type of access based upon what they need to do to get their job done. And that's the essence of zero trust that I think most organizations are going towards. But just getting passwords correctly, getting data access correct, and patching your systems, especially those most critical assets that you have to patch and keep up to the latest spec. And then ensuring that your perimeter is very well established. So you're seeing in Asia, as well as other organizations, making sure that if people open up ports that are insecure, like an RDP port or an SSH port, as soon as you see it, I can assure you threat actors have seen this as well already, and they're trying to get in based upon those same protocols. So keeping a really strong surveillance on your perimeter is absolutely critical. And I've seen that more organizations are doing this better, but we still have a lot of work to do in this space.
And can we deep dive, Mike, on the point you brought up earlier, never trust, always verify strategy, and also AI-driven threat detection, protection in enhancing cybersecurity resilience?
Yeah, well, I think the concept of continuous verification, we like to call it, right? It's imperative, and especially in an AI world, it's going to be more imperative. Because not only are we in AI world are we going to be dealing with human identities, we're also going to be addressing all of these non-human identities, these bot identities, which will be in the trillions at some point, if not much more than that, in terms of the type of identities we're trying to manage as a globe. So ensuring that not only do you have good authentication controls around who's accessing what are they allowed to see, what are they doing with that data, and understanding how your systems interact with each other. These are absolutely critical, I think, for organizations to continue to invest in. But this concept of zero trust or defense in depth is absolutely a critical, it's a critical objective for every organization to take on, starting with the perimeter around your identities, perimeter around your applications, And what I would call perimeter around your third-party suppliers, to me, that is the new perimeter that many of us aren't investing enough in, and that's this perimeter of our third parties and their third party, which is fourth party, right? So, and what we're starting to see is more and more of third and fourth party perimeters continue to bring us problems in our organization. So that's part of the zero trust that needs to be included in this aspect. And AI is just going to continue to expand this problem, both in terms of the clock speed, how quickly these attacks move. It's going to be an advantage to us as well, because we're going to be able to respond a lot faster if we're using AI correctly. But it's definitely going to increase the speed of attacks, plus ensure that attacks are, they're learning how to take advantage of our vulnerabilities a lot quicker if we don't do zero trust across all those different perimeters.
Thank you, Mike. Now, given the patchwork of stricter yet fragmented cybersecurity regulations across Southeast Asia and the wide disparity in cyber maturity within this region, how would organizations, or rather, what advice would you give to organizations to adapt their cybersecurity strategies to ensure compliance and data privacy without compromising operational agility?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, the first principle I would take is if you have a compliance strategy that isn't based on resiliency, you probably want to start over again, right? Because compliance is compliance and security. What we've realized, and certainly what I have realized over my career, the closer you get these two functions working together, the stronger both become. And compliance really, to me, is a function of assurance. Are you assuring what you're doing, what you're supposed to do around your critical controls? So I think ensuring that you're basically bringing these two programs together in a way that can share control and control data. An example would be identifying your core controls around something like a framework of NIST or ISO or OSPAR, or however you want to think about your control framework, choosing a control family, understanding those core controls, and then looking at what does minimum viable protection look like across these controls, and ensuring that you're working together with your compliance organization to make sure that, hey, how are we actually using compliance as a way for, number one, for us to assure that we're doing what we're supposed to do. That's number one. Secondly, to help us drive awareness to where we have gaps and deficiencies so that we can have better discussions with our executive teams, with our boards, with governments, and with even amongst ourselves as operators. But how do you use those same control, either deficiencies or deviations, as a way to have a prioritization discussion on what you need to do and how you need to further invest? But literally just ensuring that you're investing in your control frameworks and looking at a control family and continue to baseline yourself amongst those controls, I think, is absolutely vital. But again, the key thing I think around third-party risks, this is probably one topic that almost every board I talk to today, especially board across the United States, every board and every CISO that I deal with today, almost every single one of them is trying to figure out, how do we report our third-party risk to our board? What controls should we be thinking about? What family of framework should we be looking at? And again, whether it's NIST or ISO or some more regional or very industry-specific control framework, pick a control framework and actually treat it as assurance, and use that assurance as a way to prioritize exactly where you might have some gaps and where you need to continue to improve.
Thanks, Mike. Now, majority of organizations in Southeast Asia sadly still struggle with visibility into external threats like brand impersonation and data leaks. What practical steps would you advise them to take to strengthen their digital risk protection?
Yeah, we're not going into any specific products, but absolutely you should be looking at constant evaluation of the dark web, deep web channels, newly registered domains. There's lots of different threat intel feeds that can provide organizations more insights into this kind of work. In fact, I have recently worked with companies that, and this happens more than we like to, they realize that they've been breached because their data shows up on the dark web. And typically some access broker on the dark web is saying, hey, by the way, I have some data from a certain company, or I have access from a certain company. This is part of how these brokers work. to actually identify that, hey, I've been actually compromised. And it's a way that you detect your compromise is that in these channels. So I think constant evaluation of these channels is absolutely important, not only to understand what is the threat actor community talking about there. You want to pick a threat intel feed that has deep roots into these dark web communities so that they can really be navigating across all the different circles to understand, hey, we see someone's data or we actually see somebody's access, and that could actually trigger off. But every organization should be looking at how they're doing reconnaissance and how they're leveraging the intel of the dark web to help them stay more protected. And then there's a lot of capabilities to look at newly registered domains, and anything that has your information in it, whether it's an iteration or a dash, some variation of your company name. You need to be looking at those aspects as well. There's a lot of services that provide that, including here at BlueVoyant, that are able to do these kind of services. But definitely having threat intel into those two capabilities is really important. The other thing is to always make sure, and what I'm finding more and more CISOs are getting pulled into as it relates to executive protection and executive surveillance, is social media activities, right? Where you have folks pretending to be the CEO of a company or impersonating the CFO of a company. And more we're seeing activity in that space. And we're also seeing activity in the space of the families of these executives. So sophisticated threat actors continue to look for relatives of senior folks, to start to pattern kind of elements of where an executive might be traveling to, more details about an executive to help them impersonate that executive more effectively, and then convert that into something that they can weaponize into a company. So I've seen a number of cases where CEOs or executives are going to go attend a big event that maybe was getting publicized by a family member. And then they use that through some sort of phishing attack into the company to say, hey, by the way, I'm at this event. Please approve this invoice because I don't have access, or something to that matter. And you're seeing more and more of these kind of sophisticated attacks happen. And just ensuring that not only do you have good intel into the dark web, that you have good intel into different domains that are getting created to see if someone's trying to impersonate your company, but then also look at your executives and their exposure. And there's a lot of capabilities to better understand if they're being impersonated from a LinkedIn or some sort of social media perspective.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Mike, that malicious actors and fraudsters are increasingly using AI and generative AI to launch state-of-the-art attacks. What is your top 3 advice for organizations to better leverage AI and machine learning to defensively protect their data and infrastructure and to counter these evolving threats?
We'll start with back to the executive impersonation, right? So you have deepfakes now that are just so difficult. I mean, we're doing this interview right now. This interview will likely be cataloged in some sort of learning engine, right? And because it's public, suddenly someone might be impersonating me in a deepfake using what seems to be me speaking like this, and asking someone to do something. And we're seeing this constantly across our install base, and even our own CEO. We're seeing some very specific deepfake videos of him speaking, which are actually really hard to tell sometimes unless you really study in very discrete annotations and look at some backgrounds and some other aspects of this. And that's also where AI is helping us. So AI is helping us where maybe we can understand that there are some imperfections in the speech patterns, something in the background, some sort of other aspect that can help us determine whether this is a deepfake or not. And AI is going to continue to help us detect these things. And I'm a big believer that AI is not just a challenge for us to address. I actually think it's going to unleash a tremendous amount of defense capabilities and offense capabilities for us, and we're already seeing that as well. But where you're seeing almost every organization out there use AI to help address and learn on their own environment much quicker, whether they have vulnerabilities and where they're susceptible to those vulnerabilities, where you're seeing more organizations look at a specific, what we call campaign, and execute that campaign in their environment and learn how well are they prepared to defend against a specific campaign like that. And we're seeing more and more AI to help us prepare as well as detect capabilities that might be able to bring us problems. The other issues we're also seeing in terms of investigation, especially here where I'm at now, we're absolutely using AI to help us address a greater investigation, automation, and learning so that we can move through cases a lot quicker and help address something once we detect it, investigate this at a much quicker speed so that we can actually provide the right response to secure one of our install base. And you're seeing almost every CISO out there that I engage with, and as a CISO myself when I was an operator, leveraging more AI, not only in terms of our ability to defend ourselves, but to learn about our environments and understand where we might have some vulnerabilities or some control deviations. And we see it across the board. So AI is going to continue to be used. There's still a lot of challenges we have to address, in my opinion, not only in terms of the safety issues and the security issues that we have to continue to fortify as it deals with AI, but our ability to respond at a much faster pace and to detect things and protect ourselves before they ever come our way. I think AI is continue to help us do a better job with both.
Thanks, Mike. Now, budget constraints are prevalent in Southeast Asia and globally as well, especially in these tumultuous times. As a board advisor yourself, what metrics or outcomes would you counsel organizations in this region to focus on in order to justify investments in cybersecurity and to demonstrate return of investments to their board?
These are great questions. And, I would come back to, pick a control family again, pick a framework, and baseline yourself against those frameworks so you can understand, where you have deficiencies, where you have deviations in your control of efficacy. And that should be a big prioritization piece of how you actually prioritize your return on investment with your executives. I think the first thing, and I get asked this question a lot, Michael, how much should we be spending on security? That's like the first question I always hear from a lot of folks, especially boards. And I don't think there's a one size fits all answer. I think, a lot of industry experts have told you certain percentages, but I can tell you when I see organizations spending less than, 0.5% of revenue on security, I see a lot more challenges in that organization. And it doesn't mean if you spend more than that, you're better, because how you prioritize and how you improve that return on investment is a completely different topic. But I think at a very macro level, you need to be looking at, are you spending enough? And as a CISO, really articulating the concerns of not spending enough. And it doesn't matter what industry you're in. If you're not spending enough at a very top line level, it's going to be a challenge for you. And this is a big challenge a lot of organizations are facing. And then once you get that number right for your organization, is actually identifying, where do we actually need to make those investments? And that's why I think these control families and these frameworks really help prioritize and look at certain areas that you need to invest in. The other piece that I would highly recommend everyone to go spend more time thinking about is, how do you drive more quantitative analysis of your risk and your return and your investments in cybersecurity? Today, and this is a challenge across the industry, we're very qualitative in how we do our risk registers and how we prioritize our investments. And there's a lot of good in those qualitative assessments. But I think we have to do better in the industry and do more of quantitative analysis. I often like to refer to this as the cyber balance sheet. How do we create a balance sheet, just like an income balance sheet or a financial balance sheet? How do we create that kind of balance sheet for the cyber industry, so that we can actually start to get a better understanding of where we need to invest, where's our biggest return on investment, and inevitably, how do we build our resistance to major campaigns that are happening or risks around cybersecurity that are happening in our industry and to our company. So I think number one is actually, again, starting with, ensuring that you're spending as a percentage the right amount of cash, ensuring that you're picking a framework and really ensuring that you're baselining yourself against that framework and understanding those critical controls. In my last organization, we found around 66 core controls. And that's where we typically measured our maturity and where we had return on investment discussions with our executives and our board if we felt like we fell short of our prioritization. But at a very high level, make sure you're investing in identity, threat and vulnerability, which is patching, and your data programs. I think if you're investing in those, you're probably not going to go wrong and staying secure.
Thank you, Mike. Now, you would agree with me that talent shortage is another key problem in this region. So with this persistent talent shortage of skilled cybersecurity professionals, what role can AI-driven platforms, education, and also partnership play in augmenting lean security teams and improving incident response capabilities?
Yeah, great question again. I mean, the AI or the talent shortage has been a discussion for a lot of years, right? So, you've seen, you know, reports of 10 million job shortages in the industry, right, globally. They're not far off. And especially if you think about, the job shortages, a lot of these jobs sometimes get filled with people who are way underqualified for the role just because you're trying to fill the job and get someone to help you out in these tough situations. So there's absolutely a critical skill gaps in cybersecurity, and it's still a field that needs tremendous talent to continue to get attracted into the space because there's a lot of challenges that we still have to address here. But despite the talent gap, the reality is back to the math problem, right? Back to this fact that attacks have gone from days down to seconds. The fingers only move it so fast when it comes to the ability to type. And when these attacks are coming at us in a very automated way and they're able to happen in seconds, it's not realistic to think that a human can respond faster than a computer at times, right? So we need AI to be part of our tool belt to help us better detect and respond to these attacks and actually help us learn where the attacks may be coming from based upon what our estate looks like, which we're seeing more and more about. So AI is going to be absolutely critical, not only in terms of helping us fortify our environments, but also help us respond at a speed in which, just it's difficult sometimes for us to do as non-computers. But doesn't mean the jobs are going away. We have tremendous need for investigators and different cybersecurity roles across, governance and operations and architecture and engineering. It's a very diverse field. And we need a lot of great talent in this field, but AI is absolutely is helping us defend ourselves better and fortify our defenses in a way that is moving at a much faster speed that we just are not going to be able to compete with if we don't use AI.
Thanks, Mike. Now, we all know that innovation is advancing at lightning speed. From your perspective, Mike, what kind of emerging cyber threats and also trends should Southeast Asian organizations be most primed for the next 1 to 2 years?
It's easy to say, the big advanced attacks. I mean, we're seeing, and I'll start with, again, we call it basics, but basics doesn't mean it's easy. So let's just be on that side. But if you look at most of the attacks today, they're typically related to a bad password, people not enabling multi-factor authentication correctly, having loose privilege access into your environment. And that is something that I think every organization over the next couple of years is still going to be dealing with. I think the challenge is, especially with AI, dealing with non-human identities is going to expand at a pace that none of us have seen yet. And this is going to become a big challenge for us over the next couple of years. So investing in your identity capabilities, not just your human identities, but your non-human identities, has got to be part of your strategy as from any organization across the globe, but specifically in Southeast Asia as well. The other piece is just what we call living off the land. And, so one thing is, threat actors continue to take advantage of, just maybe some bad identity controls or not, great identity controls. The next thing they're taking advantage of is the fact that we're just not patching things quick enough still. And patching is hard. And if you take and try to patch everything in your environment, it'll probably feel like a never-ending job and unsuccessful job. So you have to understand, what do I need to prioritize in patching? What is internet facing? What is edge facing? Where do I have to really prioritize based upon critical access to applications or data or very important people in the organization, such as a domain admin or a CEO? Who are these entities? And what are they touching in my environment to make sure that I'm actually staying on top of patching? So hygiene in terms of patching will continue to be a challenge for us. And we see this all the time across organizations. And we see this, pick the supplier out there with respect to OEM, At some point, they're probably releasing some 0 day or some vulnerability, and you have to be very much on top of those 0 days and those mission critical vulnerabilities that are inside each environment. That's not going to go away. And building that muscle and that muscle reaction is going to be incredibly important that everyone needs to continue to invest in. The other piece, again, I'll continue, is that third parties are going to continue to be a perimeter that's going to grow and that is going to continue to bring a lot of challenges to us, especially as we continue to become more of a globally connected world. And not only just in terms of our CVEs or our vulnerabilities, but just leveraging more and more suppliers to help us deliver our services. We're going to continue to understand not only my personal estate as a CISO, but how is my interaction with their estates and how well are their estates operating in order to basically trust them. And I think this is going to continue to be a big opportunity for threat actors to come and say, hey, you've fortified yourself pretty well. Let me go after your weakest link now, and I'll find them and then come back to you with your weakest link. So I think advice to almost every CISO out there is look at your third-party programs and your supplier programs and make sure you're making enough investment there and you've got the right controls in place to make progress, because this will continue to be a big problem for us.
Thank you so much, Mike. Finally, could you please share with our CISO audience your top 3 guidance on what is needed from government and private sectors equally to fortify consumer and enterprise protection and national digital resilience, and also to meet the future challenges which you elaborated for us earlier?
Yeah. It's a great question. Again, all your questions are great, Estelle. And I think you've got a very astute audience, so they recognize probably way more than I need what needs to happen in certain areas. But I would say that, from a challenge from a lot of CISOs I see out there, including myself, is, and keep in mind, I've responded to over probably 2,000 breaches in my career in terms of, very high level exposed breaches. And I've also been the CISO of a breach as well. So, I know how it feels from different perspectives. And one is victimizing someone who's been impacted by a cyber event is the wrong approach, number one. So I think the most important thing that public and private organizations need to do is actually understand who's the real criminal here and who's the victim here. And not saying this is happening everywhere, but I think to this day, we still look at victims of cybercrime as maybe sometimes being the problem versus leveraging them to more help us have a better solution out there. And part of that solution is that we do better threat intel sharing as well as better collaboration with governments. And I'll give you an example. In the United States, which I was a little sad to see get disbanded, is the Cybersecurity Review Board, which I thought was an incredible public-private partnership where you had, some very senior folks from the private sector, some very senior folks from the public environment or from the public sector coming together to evaluate some big cyber events that happen in our industry and create a series of learnings that I think a lot of CISOs were learning from in terms of hygiene and identity, or whatever the issue was. It was a great learning experience and a partnership that was actually educating the industry and making us all better. And not necessarily treating people as victims as either, right? It was actually just looking at these as an opportunity to learn as an industry, which I think at the end of the day is the essence of disclosure laws. Is it's not about telling people your dirty laundry. It's literally about just saying, hey, listen, there's a situation here. We want the rest of the world to learn from this and learn as quickly as possible on how not to be the next victim. So I think that public-private partnership of just understanding, what are some of the big events happening out there and how can the industry improve overall. I think the other issue, and I'll continue to say this, is that governments have incredible access to data that not all private sector gets, not even all critical infrastructure gets, which is, I think, a big tragedy personally. But getting faster access to classified information that could be impacting a specific industry or a specific company or just in general across security, I think is something that needs to be continued to be working on part of the intel sharing, not necessarily just sharing intel in general, but specifically access to a lot of great government information out there that could help organizations better fortify either personally as a company or across an industry because they see it industry-wide. So I think that collective around intel sharing is very important, especially around access to classified information. The third piece, right, I think governments need to continue to work on is harmonizing regulation. As a CISO, and I think every CISO out there would probably, especially global CISO or any CISO operating in more than one market or industry, struggles with keeping pace with all the different disclosure rules and cybersecurity laws and all of these different components that we have to address. But I think the more governments, especially in a regional area, can work together to harmonize disclosure rules, materiality rules, cybersecurity laws, the easier it is for CISOs to actually stay both compliant with those, but also get into a working partnership, because there's a lot of investments that CISOs have to make in order to keep updated to all of these different laws and regulations across all these different sectors and geographies. And that's money that could be spent in other areas that could help us stay more protected. So I think the more the government, specifically in the region, can harmonize, I think every CISO would love to see that.
Thank you, Michael, for these critical insights. The blueprint for Southeast Asia's digital resilience is now clear and urgent. The path forward is clear: zero trust architecture, continuous third-party monitoring, and AI-driven defense aren't optional upgrades. They are survival tools. Organizations navigating fragmented regulations and talent shortages must view cybersecurity as a competitive advantage and not compliance burden. As threat actors weaponize AI and target supply chains with increasing sophistication, the organizations that thrive will be those that transform lean teams into force multipliers through intelligent automation and strategic partnerships. To our CISO audience, thank you for joining us. See you in our next episode of CISO Executive Session.